Overachievers and worst underachievers for the Dolphins on a play-by-play basis in 2024. I have my grades that we used over Touchdown Miami all season long, and we're looking at that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's game time. It's time for us here on the show to dive into the concept of over and underachievers on a snap-by-snap basis. So this was the project that we did all season long over on Touchdown Miami on Substack, but wanted to use a lot of man hours to watch every player on every play and grade them above, below, or to expectation, and talk about the final results as it pertains to which players were most consistently on a snap-by-snap basis performing above the standard expectation of the play and its design, and which ones were underachieving, because that paints the picture for who your core and nucleus players are, and alternatively, where your biggest needs are. And I think this is a really helpful list to look at, especially once we get into kind of the meat and potatoes of who's on what end of the spectrum for the Dolphins in 2024. But first, I want to make sure that everybody understands some of the limitations of this style of grading, because it is important to understand what this style and approach of assessing film is trying to tell you. And it's not trying to tell you unequivocally, black and white, these are the best players that can do anything for any situation or any dynamic and are universal players. I'm not saying that. I'd like to say that again. I am not saying the players that most consistently graded above expectation are universal players that you could put into any scheme with any play design. It's like you're charged with running a race, right? And you enter in with your 1985 hatchback, right? And you're going against a lot of like modern sports cars. At the end of the straightaway, you have to make a turn. And if you correctly make the turn, then you, as the driver of the car, or in this case, the player in question, made the to expectation decision correctly to turn the car and keep it on the road. That does not quantify the limitations of the car that you are running the race with. And in this analogy, sorry for making your brains work overtime this morning. I put off recording a little bit to make sure everybody was awake before we ran the show. The play design or the play structure or the concept, it's not the player's job to make that be the most diverse thing that you do. And if you don't run enough power between the tackles and short yardage because the coach doesn't believe that the offensive lineman can do it, that is a limitation that is not quantified in these grades. But if you try to run wide zone or crack toss on short yardage because that's where you think you have the best chance to convert, and that's the call that's made, if your receiver on the end whiffs on the block and that safety that's rolled down shoots upfield and makes a tackle for lost 3 yards in the backfield, that is not a to expectation play for the player that is cracking on the apex defender on the edge of the line of scrimmage. So that would be a below expectation, even though crack toss, you probably don't want to run on 4th and 1 and would rather just run between the tackles. If you run a fullback dive on 3rd and 1 and it converts, and the fullback runs through contact, you can say, well, that's above expectation performance for the fullback on that play because he ran through contact to get the first down. It doesn't make it the best call, right? So there's big picture issues and things that we want to be different and personnel changes and ideological shifts that we're all hoping to see that are not going to be a part of the context of this. This is who this team decided collectively they wanted to be this year. And here's how they felt they could call plays to solve problems on a play-by-play basis and win football games. And based off of that, the bottle in which you've put these players in, who was the cream that rose to the top? And who sunk to the bottom as far as meeting or exceeding or failing to reach expectations. So I hope that paints the proper picture. And I know that was a very long-winded way to kind of get into the grades. But me just popping on here and telling you the grades, if you don't understand what they mean, makes it very easy for you guys to misunderstand what I'm trying to represent and what I'm not trying to present. So the way that the grading works is every player that's on the field, you look at the call, you look at how the play played out, you look at the defense or the offense that's involved, and you see how the player executes. If it's a standard 2, it's as you would expect that play to unfold for that player, they get a 0. If it's above expectation, if they go above and beyond with their assignment, if you get a double team climb into the Mike linebacker and you blow the doors off that 3 technique and roll him 8 yards back into the backfield and then peel off and pick off the linebacker, you're going to get above an expectation grade because of the amount of displacement you created on that play. So it could be plus half a point. It could be plus 1 point. It could be plus a point and a half. It could be plus 2 points. It goes all the way up to 2. So it's 0 to plus 2 on the positive side of things, and it's 0 to minus 2 on the negative side of things. If you're an offensive tackle that gives up a strip sack in scoring territory with an awful whiff and you poorly set and you don't get hands on the defensive end at all, you're going to get a minus 2 on that play because it's a turnover in scoring territory. So like that is taking points off the board type of thing. It's the bones of how Pro Football Focus does their grading. But I trust myself to grade it because I know what I think that I know and go through that process. Instead of just taking their word for it, I did it for the Dolphins all year. So who came in on what side of the fence? We're going to go into highest performers and questions and concerns about those kinds of players next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. And make sure that you stick with us. This is a message from Intuit TurboTax. Taxes are waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back this year, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today, an expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while getting you real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. So all you get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, wondering, or worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. The plus side of things for the Dolphins, if you were to look at and I did set a snap threshold minimum here. Like I didn't want guys that took 200 snaps this year being held up to guys that took 700, 800, 1,000 snaps. It's just a little different with the sample size. So a guy like Jalen Wright performed fairly well in the opportunities, specifically early in the year, but is not represented here because he didn't play, quite frankly, enough. And there were 30 guys that met the snap thresholds that I had for the team. As far as the cutoff for a big enough sample size to be represented in the entire body of work for the roster and who your core players were this season. So here are the players. I want to give the top 10 that graded out above expectation thus far this season or throughout this season. Calais Campbell, Terron Armstead, Zach Sealer was a pretty clear separation of the most consistent above expectation performers this season. was then Jalen Waddle, Tua Tagovailoa, Aaron Brewer, Devon Achane, Jonnu Smith, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Ramsey, rounding out the top 10. There were more players that did great above expectation than that. A couple guys that were very close on the heels, Jordan Brooks, Chop Robinson, the two. So if you went to a top 12, and I told you that the top 12 like nucleus players for the Dolphins this year that were most consistently the positive above expectation performers was on defense, Campbell, Sealer, Ramsey, Chop, Jordan Brooks. Would you be surprised? Probably not. And then the offensive players on that side of the coin were Terron Armstead, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Aaron Brewer, Jonnu Smith. I don't think there's many surprises in that group. Now, Austin Jackson was pacing to be amongst those players before he got hurt. And I think that's an unfortunate reality for him. I think he was really coming into his own in technically year 3, but year 2 of the system for him from a playing time perspective. And it came out with the exit stuff at the end of the year. He tore his meniscus and will be a full go for the Dolphins next season. And that's good because the Dolphins are going to need him because he is an asset. I think he's comfortably an asset to this football team. And you hope that you get him back 100%. But the biggest concern that I have with this group is the top 2 guys. The guy, two-thirds of the clear divide highest performers on the team were Calais, Campbell, and Terron Armstead. And those are long in the tooth, consummate professionals working on practice snap counts. Calais on snap counts in the games, played the fewest amount of snaps of anybody that qualified for this category other than Chop Robinson. And that's because Chop started slow at the beginning of the year. And there were other guys in the edge rush room that were taking some of his opportunities. So if you had Chop full go to start the season, Calais Campbell would have taken the fewest amount of snaps out of everybody on this list. Now, that's because of he is who he is at the age that he is. But when your highest above expectation performers, the top 2 guys are a guy that 2 guys that, frankly, you're wondering if they're going to retire this year. Is Calais Campbell going to keep going? Would he want to come back to Miami? And Terron Armstead, who played in a lot more games this year. Still, he got it out. He's over 800 snap opportunities for the Dolphins. That's not a small workload, but did not play his best football late because he was playing through injury to try to, if it is his last ride, go out on his terms, and we'll see what decision he ends up making. That's a piece of the puzzle that when you project the team moving forward, you have to be able to account for who are the players that are going to fill in those spots and what is their ceiling going to look like. And if they're not going to be players that perform at that standard, and I don't think it's fair to expect Patrick Paul in year 2 to perform to the standard of Terron Armstead, can you get balance elsewhere along the rest of that unit to help make up the difference, where if it's a more steady 2 expectation performer and not such a high achiever, is the collective group still going to be better because it's more well-rounded? I think that's the pathway to getting there, because if Terron Armstead does decide to hang him up, or if the Dolphins decide to move on, you're not going to replace Terron Armstead. He's when he's healthy, he's one of the best tackles in the league. You won't do that. So there was foresight with Patrick Paul, and you saw some rewards of that with a player that played more than 300 snaps this season and good sampling of right tackle and left tackle. I think he's unequivocally a left tackle based on the difference of what those 2 sets of reps look like on either side of the line. And it's now on Miami to, if Terron's not back, balance the scale so the collective unit can still be equally and then above expectation, because it needs to be a better performing unit from top to bottom. And we'll get to some of those guys in just a minute. But the other concern that I have is the dollars. The dollars that Miami has invested in some of these spots and where these guys rank on the list. Frankly, Tyreek Hill being below Jonnu Smith and Aaron Brewer and Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle and Tua Tagovailoa and Terron Armstead. Like, Tua's the only guy getting paid more than he is. And again, where they're at on this list is not indicative of the limitations of the plays that are being called. It's based on what is being called and what is available to you. How do you execute it? Cannot state that enough. But you didn't pay Tyreek Hill to be the 7th highest performer on the offensive side of the ball. You're not paying him that to do that. Right? And I think that's one of the big disconnects with where the team invested and where the performance met and exceeded expectation. And I'm not grading you any differently based on your pay, right? It's if you get press man and single high safety and you're running a go route, are you stacking him and are you getting the ball? And then do you catch the ball at the catch point? And what do you do after the catch? If you're running shallow crosses and you catch the ball and then you run backwards 4 yards to try to make a bigger play happen, but you're butt ass open when you first catch the ball, and then you run backwards and lose 4 yards, is that a 2 expectation performance that you're going to lose yardage on the play? No. And then you get to the end of the year and talk to the press and wonder why you didn't get 1,000 yards. I digress. Those are the 2 concerns I have with the above expectations and overachievers tier that you have. I think you can pretty comfortably look at it, if you assume Calais and Terron are both not back. You've got a group of 10 guys that were qualifying players. That is Sealer, Tagovailoa, Waddle, Brewer, Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jonnu Smith, Jalen Ramsey, Chop Robinson, Jordan Brooks. I would assume the vast majority of that group will all be back. You could potentially add Austin Jackson in place of Terron Armstead to be an above expectation tackle, not to the same level. And he didn't qualify here because he didn't play enough snaps. But the pillars and identifying pieces of what you are, what your roster was this year, should be pretty well understood. And then the question is, how do you build around that? How do you complement that? How do you expand on that? And that question gets to the other side of this coin, which is who didn't hold up their end of the bargain? Who didn't perform the way we needed them to? Who didn't meet, just even meet expectation? And in some cases, these were the players that you were calling plays around to try to mitigate, and they still perform below expectation. And that's the big flag. We're going to get into those players next. Make sure you guys stick with us. Events are meant to be experienced live, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. So make sure you take the chance this year to get out and experience some of your favorites. If you're spontaneously deciding to go to an event near you, Game Time makes it even easier to get tickets for those events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Oh, boy. You ever just feel like you're talking to a wall? Maybe some of you guys, I've heard from a few of you guys that think I'm a little boring. Maybe some of you guys feel that way right now. I would imagine if you're an everydayer, you probably don't feel that way, though. You're not going to be surprised by this list. I have a list of 10 below expectation performers out of the list of 30 players that met the snap qualification. So this was effectively your core roster this year. You had really 12 guys that performed to expectation or above expectation, and you have 10 guys that are kind of the clear and defined tier of below expectation performers. Many of these names will not surprise you. And the good news is the worst one's already off the roster. David Long, who the team obviously moved on from at the midpoint of the season and he had opportunities and landed in Detroit, and I think he got cut from Detroit. And from a snap-by-snap basis perspective, was the lowest performing player on the roster this year amongst qualifying players. Then you have Durham Smythe at tight end. So for those of you wondering why Julian Hill keeps getting reps, the alternative is the reason why, right? And I think I think Julian could be a fine tight end 3, potentially long-term developmental tight end 2. But there's a lot of growth that's necessary, and he played an awful game in Week 18 against the Jets. So it was a pretty underwhelming final mark of the season for him, but the entire body of work this season from Durham Smythe is a player who, and this is why when we're going to get into what guys are owed and what the dead cap starts looking like, you cross-reference those things versus a set of grades like this, and it makes some of these decisions pretty easy. Spoiler alert, you could save about half of Durham Smythe's scheduled cap hit this year by moving on. And for a player who is the lowest graded for me in my assessment of the team, and it's not a be-all, end-all, and I understand, but the lowest graded performing player on a snap-by-snap basis to fail to meet expectations, and you could save $2.5 million against the cap to move on from a player like that and open it up when you have Jonnu Smith and you have Julian Hill, who took a bunch of his reps this year. That kind of stuff's no-brainers for me. Anthony Walker, Jordan Poyer, Storm Duck, Liam Eichenberg, Robert Jones, Emmanuel Agba, how many is that? Kendall Fuller, Benito Jones. And I think Benito bounced back, to be quite frank. It was a little bit up and down. The other player that just narrowly missed here was Kader Kohu, but he had an awesome final 2 months, I thought. Really bounced back for himself. But if you looked at David Long, already gone, Durham Smythe, potential cap casualty, Anthony Walker, expiring contract, Jordan Poyer, expiring contract, Storm Duck, probably your CB5 that got pushed into a bunch of action because Kendall Fuller was injured several times this season, twice with concussions and then a lower body injury. And Cam Smith was on IR twice as well. Liam Eichenberg and Robert Jones, your penciled in starters. And both these are the only two guys on this list that played, they played the most amount of snaps. They both surpassed 1,000 snaps on the season. Of course, last year, when you had Isaiah Wynn and Robert Hunt and Connor Williams, none of those guys went over 500 snaps for you. These two guys, as patchwork replacements going into a season, they both go over 1,000 and play twice as many snaps. But they are the second and third lowest graded below expectation. And these are the players that you called the offense around. These are the players that prevented you from running a lot of between the tackle power and downhill runs. And when you tried to run them, they were the ones that are missing on the two that's in the A gap and giving up penetration that leads to a run for no gain or a run for loss. These are the guys who were brought back because there was an understanding that they were well-versed within the scheme. And then you get to late in the year, and they're not the glue guys that are holding the performance together when you have new performers at tackle because of injuries, and everybody's busting their assignments because nobody's seen what it looks like when the second level bumps when you run jet motion with your outside zone. You got three guys blocking the same linebacker and two guys are unblocked to the play side, to the point of attack. And that's the kind of stuff that is, man, so frustrating. But it's the affirmation that I hope you need. If I told you the lowest graded performers on the offensive side of the ball were Durham Smythe, Liam Eichenberg, Robert Jones, you probably wouldn't bat an eye amongst the qualifying players for the amount of snaps that you take. And then defensively, your linebacker 2 spot between Anthony Walker and David Long was an abject disaster. Jordan Poyer played more snaps than anybody else in the secondary other than Ramsey. He played more than Holland. He played more than the CB2, and he played more than Kader Kohu. So Poyer was your second highest snap taker in the secondary. one of the furthest below expectation performers on the team. And that's just a guy that's a late stage player, right? Emmanuel Agba played well in the final 2 or 3 weeks, but went against some bad tackles and was a player who was an in case of emergency break glass. You made some gambles and lost in the edge group with whatever the decision-making process was with Andrew Van Ginkel. And I am not going to get into that whole story because I see it's a sob story on Twitter every day, and I don't have the capacity to do it, right? Because we're trying to find solutions and we're trying to find answers and we're trying to figure out plans to get better. But that bet going into Shaq Barrett, who retires on you, and then you got to bring Agba back last minute. And he plays hurt this year, but still is a guy who takes snaps for you. Thought he was relatively fine in the run defense, but didn't really give you any value in the passing game. Kendall Fuller brought in, had less than 550 snap opportunities this year. Being amongst the further below expectation players, thought he when he came back from the second concussion, looked like he was a step slow. So these are the kinds of spots. And then Benito Jones, who I thought is just a limited player. And I think some of what they did defensively, you needed him to be something he wasn't at times. So I think there's maybe another body that's necessary there. But that all to me paints the picture of linebacker 2, your entirety of your safety room if you're not going to bring back Javon Holland. Probably your CB2 situation and your CB4 situation needs to be assessed. I don't know that I'm going to bet on anything for Cam Smith. I would bring Cater back. We talked about that yesterday. But is he the nickel? Is he going to be the outside CB2? I think there's some conversations to be had there about what that pathway looks like for him to be the best version of himself, because he's starting to come into his own a little bit more as an outside corner. Depth at the edge group and depth on the defensive line, and then your offensive guard spots. The good news is if you're looking at this group, tight end, not a premium position. Guard, not a premium position. Safety, not a premium position. The nose tackle type plug player, not a premium position. I mean, this is the vast majority of teams of spots that were underperformers for you in my assessment of the team are players that are not premium positions. So if you get them in free agency, you don't have to pay as much as you would if you were paying a premium position player a top of market contract. And these are the guys that last longer in the draft because they're not premium spots. So when you start to look at that and then you start to build a plan of what the offseason can look like, that's going to be a central theme. The vast majority of your underperformers or non-premium positions, and that should afford you more swings of the bat in free agency with players that are in your price range and in the draft as far as quality options available at X amount of picks to get guys who can contribute to those spots. And then you could start to hopefully develop those players and things go better next year and you have a better answer at QB2 and the team's more stable and quarterback doesn't get hurt twice. And if all that happens, we'll see what it looks like. Maybe the menu's a little bit more diverse. Maybe you upgrade the car that you're running the race with as a result. And then we'll do the process again and grade the driver on how he runs the race above or below expectation and look at what drivers need to be replaced next year, in addition to whatever else, including maybe who built the car. That's going to do it for us here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. We got more debrief stuff coming out of 2024 coming your way the rest of the week. I hope to see you then. I'm Kyle Krabs, and I am out of here. Go Fins.